The small town of Ridgewood sat quietly between wide fields and long, dusty roads. It was the kind of place where the morning began with the sound of roosters, and the evenings ended with orange skies stretching over the hills. Everyone in the town knew each other by name, and even strangers were treated like neighbors. Life moved slowly there, and people felt safe, as if nothing unexpected could ever happen. In this peaceful town lived Ethan Miller, a rancher in his mid-40s. Ethan had grown up around the open fields, learning how to care for animals before he knew how to read. His father had taught him everything about ranch life: how to calm a scared horse, how to fix a broken fence, how to read the weather by looking at the clouds. Even after his parents passed away, Ethan continued living on the ranch, taking care of the land they had loved so much. Ethan was a quiet man. He didn't speak much unless he needed to, but people respected him because he was steady, calm, and honest. When someone in town needed help, Ethan was usually the first to show up. If someone's truck stopped working, Ethan would tow it. If someone's animal fell sick, Ethan would spend hours trying to save it. He didn't talk about kindness. He simply lived it. Every afternoon, when his work slowed down, Ethan sat outside on his porch, drinking tea and watching the sun slide toward the horizon. He often thought about how simple life could be when people cared for one another. He never imagined that one small moment, one instinct would soon change his entire world. Not far from Ethan's ranch lived a girl named Lena Thompson. She was 17, with dark hair that curled at the ends and soft brown eyes that usually shimmered with curiosity. People in Ridgewood said she was bright and cheerful, the kind of girl who picked wildflowers for her teachers and helped her younger cousins with homework. But life had changed for her in the past year. Her parents, once close and loving, had separated after months of arguments that slowly filled the house with tension. The laughter that once echoed through their rooms had faded, replaced with long silences and confused looks. Lena tried to stay strong at first, telling herself that adults sometimes had problems she couldn't understand. But no matter how hard she tried, the weight in her heart grew heavier. After the separation, Lena began spending more time alone. She walked through town with her earphones in, her gaze fixed on the ground. Her friends noticed she smiled less often. When they asked if she was okay, she always lied, saying she was fine. But the truth was harder. She felt lonely, scared, and unsure of where she belonged. She missed the days when her parents sat together at dinner, talking about small things. The silence after they split felt like a cold room she couldn't escape. Her mother worked long hours, sometimes leaving the house before sunrise. Her father had moved to another town, promising to visit on weekends. But the visits grew less frequent. Lena didn't blame him. She knew adults had responsibilities, but she couldn't help feeling forgotten sometimes, like a book left on a shelf. During those lonely afternoons, she often walked near the edge of Ridgewood, where Ethan's ranch stretched for miles. She liked the quiet there, the smell of fresh grass, the soft sounds of cows grazing, and the gentle breeze made her feel calmer. Sometimes Ethan saw her walking by the fence, and he always waved politely. He never asked questions, never tried to pry into her life. But he noticed the sadness in her eyes. One day, Lena had stopped at the gate of Ethan's ranch, her hands in her pockets. Ethan had been trying to guide a young calf back toward its mother, and he heard Lena's small laugh when the calf stubbornly tried to run the other way. He looked up and saw her smiling faintly, the first smile he had seen from her in weeks. "Calves are like children," he had said gently, brushing dust from his hands. "They listen only when they want to." Lena had nodded and watched quietly as Ethan finally managed to lead the calf home. For a few minutes, she had felt lighter, as if the worries pressing on her chest had loosened. Ethan didn't ask why she looked sad. He simply talked about the animals, the weather, and the wild berries growing near the fence. She appreciated that more than he knew. That small encounter stayed with Ethan. He wasn't a man who overthought things, but something in Lena's expression had touched him. He had seen sadness before when neighbors lost loved ones, when families struggled with hardships, but the sadness in Lena's eyes was different. It was deep, quiet, and hidden behind a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Over the next few weeks, Ethan saw her walking near the ranch more often, always alone. Sometimes, she looked lost in thought. Other times, she sat near the old wooden fence, watching the sky as if searching for answers. Ethan considered talking to her again but didn't want to intrude. He believed she would speak when she felt ready. But Lena never told anyone how much she was hurting. She felt guilty for feeling so broken. She told herself she should be stronger. She worried that if she tried to explain her feelings, no one would understand. People in town always said she was bright and cheerful. They didn't see the fear behind her silence. At school, her teachers noticed her grades slipping. Her friends noticed she barely ate lunch. Her mother noticed she stayed in her room for hours. But everyone believed she only needed time to adjust to the changes at home. They didn't realize how lonely she felt inside. The trouble grew slowly, like a shadow stretching longer each day. Lena began waking up with a heavy heart, unsure why she felt so tired even after a full night's sleep. She stopped doing activities she once enjoyed. She no longer painted flowers in her notebook or spent time reading in the garden. She avoided mirrors because she didn't like the sadness she saw in her reflection. Still, nobody knew the full truth. Not her teachers, not her mother, not her friends. She didn't want to burden anyone with her feelings, so she kept everything bottled up, but the pressure built stronger and stronger. Sometimes she walked to the far edges of town just to escape the noise in her mind. Ethan noticed these walks. He had a habit of waking early, long before the sun appeared, and he often saw her small figure walking along the distant road. Something about it worried him, though he couldn't explain why. He only felt uneasy, as if something was slipping out of place without anyone realizing. One afternoon, as Ethan repaired a fence, he watched Lena walk past with her shoulders hunched. She didn't stop at the gate that day. She didn't look up or wave. Her steps were slow, her head lowered. Ethan felt a strange tug in his chest. He set down his tools and watched her until she disappeared behind a distant row of trees. He told himself she would be fine. After all, she had always seemed thoughtful and gentle. Maybe she just needed fresh air. Maybe she was thinking about school or family, or her future. But the feeling in his gut remained a quiet worry that something was wrong. The next few days passed in the same pattern. Lena kept to herself. Her mother left early for work, rushing to meet deadlines. Teachers reminded Lena of missing assignments. Friends invited her to join their study group, but she always shook her head, insisting she needed to go home early. Late one evening, when the sky had turned golden, Ethan stood on his porch, looking toward the distant silhouette of the old barn on his property. A soft wind brushed against his face. The animals were calm. The day had been peaceful, yet he felt something he couldn't describe. It was as if the air carried a warning he couldn't hear clearly. He tried to shake the feeling off, telling himself he was simply tired after a long day. But deep inside, he knew something was building, something he couldn't see yet but would soon face. While Ethan tried to make sense of his uneasiness, Lena sat alone in her room, her thoughts heavy and tangled. She didn't know how to ask for help. She felt like she was standing in a storm, searching for a voice that might guide her out. But the voice never came. Little did she know that the person who would save her, literally at the last second, had already noticed her pain long before she spoke a word about it. And in the quiet town of Ridgewood, with its peaceful days and slow sunsets, a moment was approaching that would change both of their lives forever. The morning that changed everything started out like any other day in Ridgewood. The sun had not risen yet, and the sky was still a deep shade of blue. A few stars remained scattered above the quiet land. The air felt cool and fresh, carrying the smell of earth and grass. Ethan woke before dawn, just as he always did. He stretched his tired shoulders, pulled on his boots, and stepped out onto the porch. The ranch looked peaceful. The cattle slept near the fence, and the horses stood quietly in the stable. Everything seemed normal, but Ethan felt something different inside him, a strange, uneasy feeling that he couldn't explain. It was the same feeling he had sensed for days. But he tried to brush it aside again. He reminded himself that ranch work required focus. Animals depended on him, and no day started without checking on them. He grabbed his hat, picked up a small toolkit, and walked toward the east pasture, where he needed to repair a section of the fence. As he walked, the sky slowly brightened, Thin rays of sunlight painted the fields with soft gold. Birds began to chirp, greeting the new day. But even with all this beauty around him, Ethan could not shake the feeling that something was out of place. While he repaired the fence, he paused more often than usual. He listened to the wind moving through the trees, to the soft footsteps of animals waking up, and to the distant quietness beyond the ranch. There was nothing alarming, yet the silence felt heavier than normal. As Ethan finished his work and stood up to stretch, he suddenly heard a faint sound coming from the far western side of the ranch. It was so soft that he almost dismissed it as his imagination, but then he heard it again, something like a low, muffled cry or a noise of distress. It was difficult to tell from such a distance. The western side of the ranch was mostly quiet land, with tall grass, old fences, and an abandoned barn that hadn't been used in years. Hardly anyone went there anymore. The barn was still strong but dusty from age. Ethan used it only to store old tools or broken equipment that he planned to fix someday. He narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. The sound didn't repeat immediately, and for a moment he wondered if it had only been an animal. Still, the uneasy feeling in his chest grew stronger. It wasn't fear. Ethan rarely felt afraid but concern, the type that tugged at him from the inside, telling him something wasn't right. He placed his tools into the box, picked it up, and started walking toward the western field. His steps were steady, but his heartbeat had picked up speed. As he got closer, he listened carefully for the sound again. The wind rustled the grass, the birds chattered nearby, and far-off cattle bellowed, but nothing unusual reached his ears for a while. He slowed his pace, debating whether he was overthinking. The land was wide, and sounds often traveled strangely across the open fields. Maybe it was just an echo, or something harmless. But then, just as he was about to turn around, he heard it again. A faint, distressed noise carried softly by the wind. This time, Ethan froze. The sound wasn't from an animal. It had a human quality, weak, strained, and filled with pain or panic. His eyes widened slightly, and without thinking any further, he began to walk faster, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He reached the edge of the western field and approached the old barn. The wooden structure stood partly hidden behind tall weeds. The door hung slightly open, creaking as the breeze pushed against it. The sound now seemed to come from inside or somewhere near the barn. Ethan's hands tightened around his toolkit. He felt the tension in his shoulders rise. He had walked into many surprising situations in his life: injured animals, wandering strangers, and even children hiding during a game. But this felt different. The air felt heavy, almost warning him that he needed to move quickly. He placed the toolkit on the ground and walked toward the barn with careful steps. As he moved closer, he noticed footprints in the dry soil. They were small, light, and fresh. His heart thudded. A sudden thought struck him, a thought he didn't want to believe. Lena. She often walked around the outskirts of the ranch, and her steps were light, exactly like the ones pressed into the earth near his feet. Ethan felt a sudden rush of worry. He called out her name softly at first, then a little louder. There was no answer. The door creaked again, almost as if inviting him inside. He pushed the door open slowly. A long beam of sunlight entered the barn, lighting up dust particles floating in the air. Inside, old tools leaned against the walls. Wood planks were stacked neatly in one corner. A broken ladder lay on the floor where Ethan had left it months ago. Everything looked still and silent, but something felt wrong. Ethan's breath slowed as he scanned the area. His eyes moved from one corner to another. Then, he noticed something out of place, a crate lying on its side near the center of the barn, as if someone had stood on it recently. His heart raced again. He stepped further inside, calling Lena's name one more time, a little louder this time, his voice echoing against the wooden walls. Still, no response. A cold shiver passed through him. He walked around the crate, searching for any sign that someone was there moments earlier. His instincts sharpened, telling him to stay alert. He moved toward the back door of the barn, which opened out toward an old tree standing behind the building. That tree had once held a tire swing many years ago when families used to visit the ranch. Now, it stood quietly, its thick branches stretching out like a shield over the empty land. As Ethan stepped outside the rear door, he looked toward the tree and felt his entire body tighten. There, under the shade of the tree, he saw Lena. For one terrifying second, Ethan thought she was just standing there. But as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his chest. She was not standing. She was on the wooden crate that must have been taken from the barn. Her posture was tense, uncertain, and terribly unstable. She was inches away from a terrible mistake. Ethan felt a jolt of shock run through him, but he didn't freeze. His mind reacted faster than his fear. Without thinking, he rushed toward her, calling her name as loudly as he could, hoping she would hear him and stop. But Lena didn't respond. She seemed disconnected from everything around her. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, as if her thoughts had taken her far away. Her shoulders trembled with silent pain. She was lost in the storm inside her heart. Ethan slowed as he got closer. He knew he couldn't frighten her or make any sudden move that might cause her to slip. His voice softened, trembling slightly as he called her name again. He walked carefully, step by step, trying to reach her before anything tragic could happen. The crate beneath Lena shook slightly. Ethan noticed it and felt fear rise inside him like a wave. He tried to keep calm. One wrong move could change everything. Time seemed to stretch. The quiet morning now felt thick with tension. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't understand what had brought Lena to this moment. But he didn't need to understand, to act. All that mattered was reaching her in time. He stepped closer, his hands raised gently, his voice steady and soft, hoping to pull her back to the present, to safety, to life. But the situation grew more dangerous with every second. Ethan knew he had only one chance, and that whatever he did next would determine everything. Ethan moved slowly toward Lena, as if every step could either save her or make things worse. His heart pounded so hard inside his chest that he could almost hear it. The early morning sun touched the ground with a soft light. But there was nothing peaceful about the moment. Everything felt tense, fragile, and frighteningly still. "Lena, I'm here," he said softly, trying not to startle her. She didn't turn her head. Her eyes were fixed on the empty space in front of her, as if she couldn't hear anything outside her thoughts. She looked tired, lost, and drained of any strength. Her shoulders trembled the slightest bit, and Ethan felt a heavy sadness wash over him. He wished she had told someone how much she was hurting. He wished she had known that she wasn't alone. But now wasn't the time for wishes. Now was the time to act. Ethan took another slow step, keeping his voice calm. "Lena, please listen. You're not alone. I'm right here. Look at me, just for a second." For a brief moment, Lena's eyes flickered, as if she heard a voice from far away. But then, her gaze drifted again, unfocused. She didn't react, and the wooden crate beneath her shifted slightly as she moved. Ethan's breath caught. He knew he had no time to waste. He moved closer, step by step, his boots pressing gently into the soft dirt. The morning breeze brushed the leaves above them, making a faint rustling sound. It felt almost like a countdown. Ethan felt sweat form on his palms, and his mouth had gone dry, but he forced himself to stay steady. "Lena," he said again, his voice a little firmer now. "Stay still. I'm coming closer. You're not in trouble. You're not doing anything wrong. You just need help. And I'm here for you." He was close enough now that he could see how fragile she looked, her fingers shaking slightly, her face pale from fear and sadness. She didn't seem aware of how close she was to danger. She looked like someone who had been carrying too much pain for too long. Ethan lifted his hand slowly, showing he wasn't going to grab her suddenly. He spoke again, trying to reach the part of her that still wanted to hold on to life. "You're strong, Lena. You've survived so much already. I know life feels like a storm right now. But storms pass. They always do. You don't have to face this one alone anymore. Please let me help you." For a second, something changed in her expression. A tiny flicker of emotion crossed her face, fear, confusion, or maybe the faintest bit of hope. She looked like she wanted to respond, but couldn't find the strength to speak. And then, before Ethan could say anything else, the crate beneath her shifted again. The world seemed to stop. Ethan's eyes widened as his body moved before his mind even finished processing the danger. The next few seconds happened so quickly. Yet to him, they felt painfully slow every moment, stretching into long, terrifying silence. The crate tilted. Lena gasped softly and lost her balance. Ethan lunged forward with all the strength he had, arms reaching out desperately. He grabbed her legs just as she slipped, holding her weight firmly, preventing the full force of the fall. His arms tightened around her, using every bit of strength he possessed. "It's okay. I've got you. I've got you," he shouted, breathless and shaking. Lena felt his hands holding her, and her eyes widened in shock. She tried to steady herself, her voice breaking into small, scared breaths. Ethan kept a strong grip, fighting against gravity, doing everything he could to keep her safe. "Stay with me, Lena. Just breathe." "You're safe," he said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay calm. He supported most of her weight, but he could feel that she was slipping from his arms. He realized he had only seconds to act. His mind raced, searching for a solution. His free hand moved to the back pocket of his jeans almost automatically. He knew exactly what he kept there. A small, sharp utility knife. He carried it everywhere because ranch work often required cutting ropes, opening sacks, or fixing things quickly. Now that same tool had become the difference between losing her and saving her. With one hand still holding Lena tightly, he fumbled for the knife with the other. His hands shook not from fear of danger, but from fear of losing her. The knife felt heavier than usual, as though the entire world pressed its weight against his fingers. "Hold on, Lena," he whispered urgently. "I'm going to help you. I just need a second." Her breath came in small, panicked bursts. She squeezed her eyes shut, overwhelmed and frightened. She couldn't speak, but Ethan felt her trying to hold still. He flipped open the blade with his thumb. It clicked into place. He took a deep breath and reached upward carefully, positioning the blade with unsteady hands. He had to be precise. He couldn't make any sudden movements. His arm ached from holding her weight, and his muscles strained painfully, but he didn't care. He would hold her forever if he had to. The rope felt tight, worn, and stubborn. He pressed the blade gently but firmly, sawing carefully. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, and his breath came in uneven bursts. He kept whispering to Lena, partly to comfort her, and partly to steady himself. "You're brave. I'm right here. You're almost safe. Just a few more seconds." The blade cut a little deeper. His hand shook, but he steadied it by taking another slow breath. Lena's body trembled slightly, but Ethan tightened his grip around her legs, refusing to let her slip even a little. "Almost, almost," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. With one final push, the rope gave way. Lena fell forward straight into Ethan's arms, and he caught her fully, holding her close so she wouldn't hit the ground. His knees bent under the sudden weight, but he stayed balanced. He pulled her gently away from danger and lowered her onto the soft grass beneath the tree. "It's okay. You're safe. You're safe now," Ethan kept repeating, though his own hands were shaking hard. Lena's breathing was uneven, but she was alive. Her chest rose and fell, though she looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and faint. Tears slipped down her cheeks, though she didn't seem to notice them. She tried to speak, her voice almost a whisper. I'm sorry." Ethan shook his head immediately, his eyes soft and full of care. "No. Not one more sorry. Not today. You're here. That's what matters. You're safe because you're meant to be here. And we're going to get you help. You don't have to hide your pain anymore." He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders gently. She leaned against him, her body shaking lightly not from cold, but from shock and emotion. Ethan held her, steady and gentle, letting her know she wasn't alone anymore. With one hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed emergency services. "Hello? This is Ethan Miller. I need help at my ranch. Please come quickly. A young girl needs medical attention." He gave clear directions, forcing his voice to stay calm, even though his heart still raced. When he ended the call, he looked down at Lena again. "You're going to be okay. Help is on the way," he said softly. Lena nodded faintly, tears still falling. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I got here in time." He stayed beside her, keeping her warm, keeping her awake, speaking to her quietly so she knew she wasn't alone. He told her to breathe slowly, to focus on his voice, to stay with him until help arrived. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually the sound of a siren echoed faintly through the fields. Lena squeezed his hand weakly, and Ethan gave her a gentle smile. "You're safe now," he whispered again. "You're safe because you survived the hardest moment of your life, and you're not facing anything alone anymore." And as the ambulance approached, Ethan knew something had changed forever, not just for Lena, but for him too. He understood now that sometimes life gave a person a chance to save someone else. And sometimes, that moment came at the very last second. The sound of the ambulance grew louder as it crossed the dusty road leading to Ethan's ranch. The flashing lights broke the quiet morning, painting the old barn and fields with quick bursts of red and blue. Ethan stayed right beside Lena, keeping his jacket around her shoulders as she leaned against him. Her breathing was slow but steady now, and her eyes were half open, filled with exhaustion and relief. "You're doing great," Ethan whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Just stay awake a little longer. Help is almost here." Lena nodded faintly. She looked drained, but something about Ethan's presence made her feel safe. She didn't have the strength to say much, yet she listened to the calmness in his voice, letting it guide her back to reality. Two paramedics hurried toward them with gentle urgency. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, knelt beside Lena and began speaking softly to her. "Hi, sweetheart. We're here to take care of you. You're safe now. Can you hear me?" Lena blinked and nodded. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The other paramedic checked her breathing and pulse, asking her simple questions to keep her grounded. Ethan watched quietly, his heart still racing from everything that had happened. He hadn't realized how much strength it had taken to hold her until now. His arms ached, and his legs felt weak, but he stayed focused on Lena. The paramedics placed a blanket around her and carefully lifted her onto a small stretcher. Lena clutched Ethan's hand weakly as they raised her. "Don't leave," she whispered, her voice small and frightened. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan assured her immediately. "I'm right behind you. I'll meet you at the hospital." Hearing that, she relaxed a little, and her hand finally loosened its grip. The ambulance doors closed gently, and the siren started again, softer this time. As it drove away, Ethan stood in the same spot for a long moment. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if he were finally allowing himself to breathe. The field felt strangely quiet again. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was a silence of relief, of hope. Ethan looked at the place where Lena had stood moments away from danger, and he felt a deep gratitude that he had arrived in time. It didn't matter how or why he sensed something was wrong. What mattered was that she was alive. He walked back to his house, his steps slow, his mind replaying the morning over and over. He couldn't shake the image of Lena's frightened eyes, the trembling in her voice, or the way she collapsed into his arms when he saved her. It had all happened so fast, but it had also changed something permanently inside him. He grabbed his keys from the kitchen table, washed his hands quickly, and drove toward the hospital, following the same route the ambulance had taken minutes earlier. His palms were still shaking slightly against the steering wheel. When he reached the hospital, he walked straight to the reception desk. "The girl brought in earlier," he said, his voice steady but filled with worry. "Her name is Lena Thompson. Is she okay?" The nurse checked the records and nodded gently. "She's stable. The doctor is with her right now. You can wait in the lobby, and someone will speak to you soon." Hearing that, Ethan felt his shoulders loosen with relief. He sat down, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. His mind buzzed with thoughts, questions, worries, hopes. He didn't know how Lena's mother would react, or whether Lena would want to talk to him again. But he knew he wouldn't leave the hospital until he was certain she was safe. After what felt like a long time, a doctor approached him with a calm expression. "Mr. Miller?" he asked. "Yes," Ethan said immediately, standing up. "I'm Dr. Harris. Lena is stable. She'll need some rest, emotional support, and continued care. But she's out of immediate danger. She was asking for you." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "Yes. Just a few minutes." Ethan walked into the small room where Lena lay resting. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were open, soft, and calmer than before. She looked fragile, yet somehow stronger too, as if she had stepped back from the edge and found solid ground again. When she saw Ethan, her lips trembled into a weak smile. "You came," she said quietly. "Of course," Ethan replied, pulling a chair beside her bed. "I told you I wouldn't leave." Lena looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the blanket nervously. "I didn't mean for things to go so far," she whispered. "I just felt so lost." Ethan nodded gently, his voice soft. "I know. Pain can make the world feel small and dark. But you pushed through it today. You survived the hardest moment a person can face, Lena. That takes strength, more strength than you know." Tears filled her eyes again, but they weren't the same tears as earlier. These were tears of release, of relief. "My mom is coming," she said quietly. "They called her." "That's good," Ethan replied. "She loves you. She'll want to be here." Lena looked at him with a question in her eyes. "Why were you there?" she asked softly. "How did you know?" Ethan exhaled, thinking about the morning. "I didn't know," he said honestly. "But something told me to go to the barn. I can't explain it fully. It was just instinct, like something pulling at me, telling me to check." Lena stared at him for a moment. And then she whispered, "Thank you. You saved my life." Ethan shook his head gently. "You saved your life too. You held on long enough for me to reach you. That matters." They sat quietly for a while, letting the calmness settle between them. Soon after, the door opened, and Lena's mother rushed in, tears streaming down her face as she ran to her daughter. Lena reached for her, and they held each other tightly. The moment was raw, emotional, and filled with love that had been waiting to surface. Ethan stepped back to give them space. He felt relief wash over him again, seeing Lena held safely in her mother's arms. He quietly made his way out of the room, giving them their moment. Over the next days and weeks, Lena received emotional care, therapy, and support from both her family and professionals. She began talking about her feelings, something she had hidden for too long. It wasn't easy for her, but each day she grew a little stronger. Ethan visited her regularly. Sometimes they talked about simple things, animals, school, or the weather. Sometimes Lena shared what she was learning in therapy, and Ethan listened with patience and care. Their bond grew naturally, rooted in trust and gratitude. Ethan never treated her like someone fragile or broken. He treated her with respect, the same way he treated everyone. One sunny afternoon, weeks later, Lena stood in Ethan's ranch yard again. This time, she wasn't walking alone in sadness. She was smiling softly, her eyes brighter than they had been in a long time. She watched the cattle grazing and felt the warm breeze touch her face. "It feels different now," she said quietly. "It should," Ethan replied with a gentle smile. "You fought your way back to the world." Lena looked at him. "I want to help other people someday. People who feel the way I felt. I don't want anyone to hide their pain like I did." Ethan nodded proudly. "You'll help more people than you know, just by being honest about what you survived." Lena smiled, feeling a strength inside her she hadn't felt before. She wasn't the same girl who had walked through the fields hurting silently. She had taken a step toward healing. She had been saved. But more importantly, she had chosen to keep living. Ethan continued his ranch work. But he carried the memory of that morning with him. He understood now that sometimes the quietest instincts could change everything. Sometimes, life gave you a chance to save someone not through strength alone, but through kindness, presence, and courage. And every time he saw Lena smile, he felt grateful that he had followed that instinct and arrived at the last second that mattered most.